Your reaction isn't random. You might not accept this right away, but there's a real possibility that nothing was ever wrong with you. It was something else. You just learned to live in a mode that once made perfect sense. And the problem is, that mode doesn't automatically turn off, even when the danger is long gone. Look, there's a system inside you that reacts before you even get a chance to think. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself. It just flips a state: tension, control, anxiety, numbness, or emotional overload. And only after that, you try to make sense of it, but the explanation always comes later. Always. And here's the key thing: this system was never built for your comfort, it was built for survival. And that's not a metaphor, that's literal. Because if you start demanding it to calm down, be normal, stop overreacting, you're asking a survival system to stop doing its job. Now, here's where most people get stuck. They start asking, why am I like this? Why does everyone else seem fine? Why do I make everything complicated? But that's the second layer of the problem, not the reaction itself. The interpretation of the reaction. Because the reaction on its own is neutral. Tension is not a problem. Avoidance is not a problem. Even emotional overwhelm is not a problem in itself. The problem starts when you attach meaning to it. Something is wrong with me. And that's where the loop begins. You feel tension. You judge yourself for it. The tension increases. You try to control it harder. And the system escalates even more. And now the most important part that almost nobody explains properly. This is not your personality, not your emotional nature, and not just stress. This is learned sensitivity. Imagine your nervous system is a security guard, and this guard used to work in a very dangerous neighborhood where you had to react fast because hesitation meant consequences. And over time, it learned a simple rule: any sudden movement equals possible threat. Any change in tone equals possible threat. Any unpredictability equals possible threat. And now that same guard is working in a place where the danger is no longer there. But it doesn't know that because it doesn't have a function called double check reality. It reacts using old rules. And you can't just tell it, hey, relax, it's fine, because it doesn't speak in words. It speaks in signals, body signals, emotional memory, pattern recognition. And that's exactly why you sometimes don't understand yourself. You can be sitting in a completely safe situation and still feel tension and think, but nothing is happening. Yes, logically, nothing is happening. But the system is not responding to logic. Now, the question that always comes next is, okay, but where did this even come from? Because this doesn't feel like something you chose, and it isn't. You didn't sit down one day and decide, I want to become anxious. I want to overthink. I want to feel unsafe, even when nothing is happening. This is learned, but not in the way you usually think about learning. Not as information, as experience, as repetition, as emotional pattern. Let's slow this down. Your nervous system doesn't store beliefs like language. It stores patterns like weather. It remembers what happened, what you felt, what you had to do to adapt, and most importantly, what worked to keep you safe at the time. So if at some point in your life things were unpredictable, not necessarily extreme, just unpredictable, emotionally unstable, or confusing, or you had to constantly adjust yourself to other people's moods, your system learned something very simple. Not as a thought, as a reflex. Staying alert is safer than relaxing. And once that gets learned, it doesn't just disappear when life changes, because the system doesn't update based on logic. It updates based on repetition and emotional intensity. Now, here's the part people miss. It doesn't matter if the original situation is gone. What matters is what your body expects, not what is true now, but what feels possible. So, even in a safe environment, your system might still scan for tone changes, slight rejection, distance in people, delayed responses, facial expressions, silences that feel off. And you don't consciously choose that. It just happens in the background, like an app running you didn't open. Now let's go deeper. Because this isn't only about bad experiences, it's also about lack of something. Stability, consistency, emotional safety that doesn't change every day. For a nervous system, consistency is regulation. When things are predictable, the system learns. I don't need to stay on high alert all the time. But when predictability is missing, the system does the opposite. It stays ready. Not because it wants to suffer, but because unpredictability is what it learned to treat as danger. And this is where a very important misunderstanding happens. People assume trauma is always about one big event, but very often it's not. It's accumulation. Small moments, repeated over time, that never got resolved in the body. Moments like not being understood, being emotionally dismissed, having to hide reactions, not knowing what response you'll get next, feeling like you have to read the room to stay safe. None of these alone might look dramatic, but together they teach the system a pattern. Pay attention all the time. And once that becomes the baseline, it stops feeling like a reaction. It starts feeling like personality. Like, I'm just like this. But that's the trick. It's not identity. It's adaptation that became automatic. Now here's something important. Your system is actually very efficient. It chose the strategy that increased survival. Hyper-awareness works. Control works. Anticipating problems works. Shutting down works. These are not failures. They are successful adaptations to a specific environment. The problem is only this. You are no longer in that environment, but the strategy is still active. And that mismatch is where suffering comes from. Not from the sensitivity itself, but from using an old survival strategy in a new context. And this is why advice like, just relax, just stop overthinking, just let it go, doesn't reach the root. Because it assumes the system is choosing the reaction. But it's not a choice in the moment. It's an automatic prediction. Your brain is not asking, is this logical? It is asking, is this familiar? And familiarity wins over logic almost every time. So if your system learned early that tension equals safety, then calm can actually feel unfamiliar, sometimes even unsafe. Not because calm is dangerous, but because it doesn't match the old map. And this is the key shift. Nothing about you is broken. And this is the key shift. Nothing about you is broken. Which means the problem was never the presence of your reactions. The problem was the timing of them. Because your system is not reacting to what is happening now. It is reacting to what it predicts is about to happen next. And that prediction was built somewhere else, in a different context, under different conditions, where hesitation had a cost, where uncertainty was not neutral, where waiting for clarity was not safe enough. And when a system is built in that kind of environment, it does something very specific. It prioritizes speed over accuracy. It chooses early protection over correct interpretation, because in that environment, being slightly wrong but fast is safer than being exactly right but late. So, what you experience now as overreaction is not excess, it is outdated optimization, a system still optimizing for speed in a world that no longer requires it. And this is why insight alone does not resolve it, because insight operates at the level of understanding, but your reactions operate at the level of prediction. And prediction is not updated by explanation, it is updated by mismatch, by repeated evidence that the expected outcome does not occur. This is also why you can understand yourself perfectly and still feel unchanged, because understanding does not rewrite prediction, it only describes it. And description is not enough to overwrite something that is being generated automatically. So, what actually changes things is not new beliefs, it is interrupted cycles, moments where the predicted chain does not complete itself, where the internal sequence starts, signal to tension, to escalation, to preparation, but something breaks the chain before it fully resolves. At first, this is almost invisible. It does not feel like progress. It feels like nothing happening. But from the system's perspective, it is extremely important because it creates an error in prediction, not a conceptual error, a lived one. And repeated enough times, these small errors begin to accumulate, not in the form of insight, but in the form of recalibration. The system starts to reduce certainty in its old model, not because it is convinced otherwise, but because the model stops matching outcomes consistently. And that is the only mechanism it actually trusts. Consistency over interpretation, repetition over explanation, outcome over meaning. So the shift is not that you stop reacting. The shift is that the reaction stops being fully predictive. It becomes less absolute, less automatic, less complete in its execution. And in that space, even if it is extremely small at first, something new becomes possible. Not calm as an idea, but calm as a gap in the sequence. A moment where preparation is not fully necessary. A moment where the system does not fully commit to the old pattern. And that is why nothing about you being broken was ever the relevant question, because broken implies something that needs repair.